This is suburbia. If you haven't seen it, look right or left.
What you are looking at is civil obedience in the landscape. Not a single law has been broken. Next, we will examine civil disobedience in the landscape, as Thoreau understood the term.
The philosophy espoused by James Rose might evoke such comments as stubborn, independent, or even revolutionary. I would hope that what we learn is that, yes, there is a fine blend of all these traits to be found lurking in his personality, and many more, such as caring, sensitive, perceptive, and human. Every truly creative figure will exhibit this diversity. I know you will find in the message woven here by James Rose that there is indeed a humane and sensible alternative to our environmental design solutions.
Professor Russell, you know and I know a landscape is not made with words or bits of philosophy. It's more a question of what you see and the way you see it. For instance, in this suburbia, the outdoors and the indoors are not separated. People are continually asking me how I design a garden, as if I had some kind of formula, and I don't.
I do not do anything to prevent them from being alive. They're already alive. It's not something I do. It's already there. I just don't destroy it. It's as simple as that, you see. And people, they look at it in a different way. They think it's something I do. It's something I don't do. And it's something I prevent them from doing. And then what's there is wonderful.
There are also people who see landscapes as something out there, unrelated to what happens inside them. This is blindness. In this particular picture, some people see rain. It is not. It is a fountain made to look natural. It's conforming to nature rather than conforming to the absurdities of some zoning laws.
Well, for instance, a setback law on this property. There's several setbacks. On the front, it's 40 feet back from the street. On the side, it's 20 feet back on the one side. On the other side, it is 12 feet back, and at the rear, it is 30 feet back. And by the time I have conformed to all these setbacks, I can only use about 1/2 of the property which I pay taxes on for building purposes. The rest, it is not written, but only it is certainly implied that then I should have a lawn that belongs to the community, and I'm still paying the taxes on it. And also that on this particular piece of property, when I obey all the setbacks, which I have done, the size of the property that I can use to build on is 1/2 the size of a tennis court. And it is on that area that I have built this particular house. And that's why in the book I am calling it How to Build on 1/2 a Tennis Court, because that is what you get into when you meet all the requirements. And that I have done, and that is legal. However, it's not legal in the way that the inspectors understand it, because what they mean and have said is that you have a green lawn and a path up to the house and foundation planting, and then they're sure you're legal. I don't have any of that, and but I have privacy. Actually, you see, those laws that are made, setback laws and everything else, are basically designing our environment. And I think they are designed by the people who make the laws are incompetent as designers. One of the big problems in suburbia is getting people, visitors, guests at your house to come to the front door. The driveway is usually put in for the use of the owner and goes directly to the garage. I put in these 2 parking spaces for my client. Ooh. And then found out that in that community, which is Allendale, they have a law that says you cannot have parking in front of the house. And so I could not get an apron to the parking space that I had provided. However, if you drive down the street, you will find that practically every house has parked cars in front of the house, and I don't find anybody in jail because of it. And by Suburbia Transformed, I mean that instead of giving over that front property to the community, property that you are paying taxes on and which you are forbidden to build on, but not forbidden to use, that you can transform it from a lawn with a walk up to the front door to a space that can be used for your private use, not for public enjoyment. In this job, we decided to keep peace in the community by not changing the landscaping in front of the house, but by working only at the rear, which is traditionally considered the owner's private domain. In the rear, there's a little stream, a drainage stream, really, that went through that whole community. And we decided, and they were having problems with it, but we decided to widen it and shape it and use the dirt that we got out of widening it to make a mound that would screen us from the neighbor, and the neighbors are sort of 1, 2, 3. There's no privacy at all the backs of the houses run together. So we did, and when we got this mound started, the neighbor came over and asked her, "When are you going to move that pile of dirt?" And she said, "Oh, well, we're not. We're going to plant it and use it for screening." And she said, "Well, what do you want screening for?" And my client said, "Well, for privacy." And she says, "Privacy from what?" And believe it or not, after just this spring, they put up a 6-foot fence to hide the mound. This is privacy from what? This is her backyard. You see the clip? That's what, and now who wouldn't want to look at that? You see, you have to know where the insanity is, otherwise you can't treat it. Well, actually, people who come to me may come with all those, let's call them hang-ups, but they are really, in a sense, because they come to me, asking to be shown a new way or a more efficient way of doing their place, even though that is not said. In the same way that it is not usually said, we'll have Belgian blocks on our driveway. Although, you see, very often people will say, what are you going to have on the edges? As though that were solving the problem. And it isn't. It doesn't solve the problem at all. It sometimes makes a problem because you've got this expensive edging on something that shouldn't have been there in the first place. So the package costs more than what's in it. And in this particular instance, the Belgian blocks simply make you follow a course that is not the most efficient in getting you where you're supposed to go. And once you get there, there's another whole problem about how do you get out. A rational design does not begin with details. It ends with details. And to describe that also in the book, I use a pun which I like very much. It's detail wags the dog. And I think that describes what is happening. The children that live in the house with all the Belgian blocks on the driveway are friends of another job of the people in the house where I did before, and they are very anxious to get a solution to the problem that is like the one that has no Belgian blocks, and where the Belgian blocks that were there were taken out. I took out the Crescent Drive, and instead of that, put in what I call an entrance. This left a drainage problem, so I made a dry stream, a stone garden, that really was the answer to how to handle the drainage. So that while the father saw Belgian blocks, and the mother saw Belgian blocks as a sign of grandeur or affluence or something, or prestige maybe, the children look at it from a totally different point of view. And I find children very enjoyable critics because they think more or less the way I do. I don't bring in rocks to use them or to talk to them. Rocks that are there, I try to use instead of dig a hole and bury them, as if they were something obscene. Well, it was a rocky site, and in grading, planting, creating terraces and so forth, we accumulated a lot of rocks that were already in the property. All had certain characteristics that I found reasonably interesting, and I came back to the job one day and I found out that all the rocks had disappeared. And then I discovered through detective work that the backhoe man had dug a hole and buried all these rocks. He told me so. And so I told him to unbury them. I call it the resurrection. Generally, it is simply using what is there on the site, and sometimes it's rocks, sometimes it's plants, sometimes it's rolling ground, sometimes it's flat ground, and you use it in the way that it is most adapted to. And that is, I think, using it properly. There's a drainage problem on almost every piece of property. Because you bring in a house and you bring in many things that cause a difference in what happens to the water that falls on the land. And it can lead to a drainage problem, either by runoff onto somebody else's property, or a collection of water in the basement or at the side of the house. And solving that problem is the function of design. Now, it can be solved by simply digging a ditch, putting a pipe in and a drain pipe and taking the water off and letting it flow into the public drainage system, or it can be solved in a more graceful way by creating a stream for the water to go through and sometimes recirculate. And there are many, many ways of handling this. These things are not fantasy, but they are practical solutions to very real problems. An entrance and an exit are very important parts of everything, including the landscape. Well, there's nothing wrong with the rectangle. There's something wrong with anything that's out of place. That's what it amounts to. And this just didn't fit. The rectangular pool just didn't fit. And so My job was sort of to make it appear less rectilinear. The question of doing a swimming pool, you again have certain laws, a fence around it, that the law can become very absurd. And so we, instead of making a conventional swimming pool with an 8-foot deep end for a diving board, which the clients didn't want, they wanted more of a plunge pool. Why, instead of calling it a swimming pool, where we would have to get a different kind of permit and have different requirements for safety, in quotes, we made a 3-foot pool because that can be classified as a lily pool, and for that you don't have to have these requirements, which we did. However, the machinery that goes with this 3-foot pool is the same as for a swimming pool, so that it's perfectly safe. I mean, you're not going to get typhoid or malaria by going into it because it has a chlorine and the other devices that are used in the swimming pool. And yet we didn't have to have the fence or the other things because we stuck to the 3-foot depth. And I'm sure that is, would be looked upon with suspicion because it is used as a swimming pool and yet does not conform to swimming pool legal requirements. The Paley job is a corporation project, and is much larger in geographic size. Its size simply frightens people, and sometimes a person who is good at a small place can't do a large place because of a question of fear. A designer who can do a large place can also do a small place, and a person who can do a small place can also do a large place if he understands the question of scale. That's all there is to it. This is a corporation and a large building, and we built, or they built, right up to the setback line. And the setback line is 50 feet from the property line. And this is used for electrical wires and so forth. And by law, you are not supposed to put any obstacles or any objects within that 50-foot line so that the electric company can come in and put in a new wire or restore an old one, and this happens maybe once every 5 years. And for that, you are supposed to leave the property blank so that they can run their trucks in any way or any time that there is some fault in the electricity. I explained to the Paleys that this was it was an illegal procedure to do landscaping within that 50 feet, and that if they wanted to take the responsibility, I would be glad to do it because I thought it was an absurd law. When you are confronted by an absurd law, that's the time to resort to civil disobedience. And they agreed that they would take the responsibility, which so far has never been questioned, but only we built within that 50 feet forbidden line. However, always leaving access for a truck to come in so that they could mend the wires. While we have violated the law, we have not prevented the intention of fixing electric wires. Without bringing in a lot of new material or new stuff, as the construction work went on, a lot of things that were already there revealed themselves, as for instance the enormous rocks that you have seen. None of those were brought in order to have rocks as a possession. They were simply there, and rather than digging a hole to bury them and get rid of them so you could have a nice lawn or something of that sort, we used them. The same thing with, there were several rows of trees that somebody had planted years ago. We actually dug them and transplanted them, rearranged them, put them where they would create space, create screening from the street, create privacy, and make what people are now calling a garden. But we used what was there. We just worked with what we had to create to not so much create as to bring out the most that was already in the environment.
As you have witnessed, there is an alternative to the mundane, to the commonplace, to the uncaring standard. Now, this does not mean anarchy, that we should not be guided by principles in our community affairs. It does mean that there are insufficient principles and policies which address the quality of life and respond to natural laws. As Mr. Rose so richly identified, the results of such sensitivity makes one wonder how there could be any alternative.
After all this civil disobedience, Professor Russell, do you realize that everything that has been said and shown in this film in the past half hour was said in one stanza by Henry David Thoreau? Always the general show of things floats in review before my mind, and such true love and reverence brings that sometimes I forget that I am blind.